And there it is. Welcome everyone to another episode of LunarCrush Live. Today we've got Jay from Avalanche. But before we start, always want to have our disclaimer. We do not take payment for this live stream. We bring on fun, cool, exciting people who have dedicated their lives to the industry. Jay is one of them. Make sure you get in there in the chat. Ask some questions. We'll try and do our best to get to as many as we possibly can. And then get that subscribe button going. Looks like we've got Holoplex, Sam.io. We've got Hobie coming on in December. We have maybe a famous actress coming on that I haven't told John about. It's going to be a great end of the year. So he pops his head up. So I really appreciate it, everyone. Jay, my man, how are you doing, dude? It's good to see you.
Doing really well. I think it's been a while since we last spoke, and I know we shared DMs a bunch, but I think it's about time to get that hour in.
Yeah, for sure. I was looking at it. It was February 10th. It was about 9 months later, which is an infinite amount of time in the cryptocurrency industry. 9 months. I can't even believe all the things that have happened. But before we start, where are you in the world? What's the weather like there? We always want to know what's happening.
Currently in Brooklyn. Just got back from a fantastic week in Lisbon. So I don't know if you guys heard of the activation that we did at Avalanche, but we created this Avalanche House. It was a multi-day event, Wednesday to Saturday. We had almost 3,000 people come in and out through we announced this event. I kid you not, we announced this event with 4 business days before the first date. So it was the Friday or Thursday prior to that. So no one really knew about it except for kind of like the people that were part of the planning stages. And it was a little bit of a leap of faith. We said, hey, there's this massive, massive group of people that want to just start meeting people in person. Of course, we do a lot of the video chats across the times in COVID, and also because of the decentralized nature of a lot of the companies that we as a group work with. I don't think we're too foreign to the idea of remote work, but interpersonal relationships are obviously super important. And so I was really glad to see a lot of people come in and out, and really no agenda. I think that was what the beauty of it was. And I think so many cool ideas were shared, met fantastic people. One thing that was fascinating to me was the age ranges. I think the oldest person at the event must have been past his 80s, I would say. He was just a crypto enthusiast, was insane. So crypto has no bounds, no biases towards age. I would say if you get it, you get it. If you don't, then it'll just take some time. Back to where I'm at now in Brooklyn, Williamsburg to be exact. That's where it seems like the crypto hub is these days, at least on the East Coast in the US. And the weather is cloudy. Starting
to get that fall weather out there.
Yeah.
Like Lisbon, I want to touch on that, but also like the age thing. I love that because it's like, crypto spans generations, and it's a mentality. It's a way of thinking. It's it's an unlearning, and relearning of new things. And to hear that there are folks, in their 80s, 70s, 60s that are also now talking with people in their 20s and commingling, that sounds amazing. And then why Lisbon? Why'd you guys pick that as the spot? I just had a friend go there not too long ago, and they were just like, this is the first place I've gone internationally. I'm like, I want to live there. And this is someone from San Francisco.
That was apparently the meme for expats or visitors, by the way. So I don't know who's going to have the conviction to do it. Well, I think there's 2 reasons. Lisbon or Portugal as a whole, but I think Lisbon specifically, they've done a lot to bootstrap the growth for fintech, broadly speaking. I believe they have a decent amount of incentives from the tax perspective, as well as citizenship or visas. There's also a lot of new co-working spaces. So the space that we partnered with was called Hedon. It was an eco-friendly co-working space. They're oversubscribed, and there was this event that they were willing to put on with us, and so that was kind of the initial kind of pulse read of what we were seeing. We were like, all right, well, at least outside of the crypto context, there's a lot of energy with fintech and just tech in general. The second reason is because of the key events that were happening. ListCon, ETH Lisbon, there was a bunch of others, like Cosmos had an event near Solana. So we were thinking, all right, well, having another conference is maybe adding a little bit too much noise to the signal to noise ratio. So let's see if we can figure out how to give back utility to the people. And we said, hey, why don't we just have a place where people can just take a break from it all and chill for a little bit? So the idea was chill with Avalanche. You'll have a good time. No strings attached. no fees, come in, use the Wi-Fi, and if you want to leave after using the Wi-Fi, that's totally cool. If you want to come in and do something else, that's great. We announced our Formula E partnership, so we now have officially a Formula E team in partnership with Andretti Motorsports.
Super cool, man. You guys are just crushing it right now.
Wow.
Amazing.
What were some of
the
things you heard talked about in Lisbon? What kind of projects are people excited about?
Yeah, I mean, there was let's see. So there was a lot of interoperability plays, people trying to solve composability as an issue, broadly speaking. So basically, just the seamless, I guess, use of tokens across platforms and across protocols. Right now, what you're having is bridges have to create synthetics to match the other side effectively. So you're basically fragmenting liquidity for every bridge that exists. So if you have unsafe bridges, then that's the weak point. If you have safe ones, then that's the reliable one. So that's kind of one sector. Another one was a lot of kind of these new projects that you didn't really hear about, or at least new efforts that you didn't hear about since like the 2017 era, where it almost felt like it was really far out in 2017 because it was just a white paper, but now you're seeing it and you're talking to the teams that are building it. They're like, oh, well, actually, we're not in the white paper stages. We're way farther than that. We actually have a proof of concept that we're going to deploy next week. So that was actually really exciting. Like there was one project one woman I spoke with, she was trying to bring agriculture and create, basically unify that with DeFi and have like a stable coin as a basket for those commodities. And so giving the people that are trading commodities on the ag side exposure to DeFi through that stable coin. There was also another project that was talking about real-time payments. So I know Sablier is one project that has been pushing that. I talk about that all the time, but there are other new ones that are saying, hey, maybe there's a better way to do this with a multi-chain focus or I don't know, some unique add value, but just a bunch of these different ideas that are like, whoa, okay, I think we're at a new stage now. We're not just about AMMs and DEXs. I think we have other things that we should be caring about.
I feel like there was a time in the industry where you kind of almost felt like you knew everything cool going on. You kind of were like, oh, I know this project, or oh yeah, I've heard that project. We're not at this stage where it's like, I've got no clue. Like, and I feel like we're at kind of this like HubSpot even in the industry where it's like we're getting 10 to 15 new projects like trying to get on LunarCrush, and it's like I can't even. You just can't keep up with the innovation that's happening, and it's like it's outrageous. So last time we were on February 10th. It's 9 months later. What is one thing that's happened in those 9 months from the industry that you did not expect whatsoever? Like what's happened in the last 9 months?
I mean, for me personally, I think the explosion of the metaverse has been super surprising. I knew that always had a long-term play somewhere, but I didn't necessarily think that the brands that I knew had that or that knew existed were the ones that were going to take that throne effectively. Not necessarily pointing any project specifically, but I mean, I've known about Axie, I've known about Mana or Decentraland, all these different projects for a very long time. But I think one thing that I couldn't get fixated on, maybe I just didn't dig deep enough, but I was thinking, well, if you're too early, that's also an issue. You don't get any credit for being too early. And I actually know that firsthand from working at a DEX that was, I arguably would say was early, way before the Uniswap days. So I think that was kind of one approach. Another one is when people would ask me, how long do I feel like this market has to go, at least this run? I said right around now, actually. So not necessarily like, I think the May situation was like, oh, maybe I stand corrected. Who knows where this is going to go? But obviously that wasn't the case. Yeah. And then maybe the last thing is gaming. The excitement around gaming makes sense to me again, but it's also like I've had conversations with legacy gaming app developers and companies that are just interested in this space. And so now the legitimacy is there. It's just a matter of execution. And that gets me really excited because I'm a gamer behind the crypto, I guess, space. I've grown up loving games, all types, some complex, some super simple. At the end of the day, it just makes sense to me, at least. Not all games should be on blockchain, but there are some that make sense to be on it. Like Magic the Gathering, if there's a digital version of that totally makes sense on chain. Same with franchises like Pokemon and things that have collectibles. And so that's, I think, some things that those are kind of the three things that I think excite me in the last 9 months or so.
So to follow up on that, so Facebook, we are going to pick on one entity here. So Facebook yesterday decided to rename themselves Meta. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I tweeted like a cheeky tweet yesterday about it. I was saying something like, if the boogeyman puts on a mask, you still kind of know it's the boogeyman. It seems like anything that Mark Zuckerberg does triggers crypto people, maybe rightfully so. So I think it's a little bit of gaslighting, as is tradition for Twitter, I feel like. But my take is, I mean, it's interesting. That's also another flag for legitimacy. Yeah. All of a sudden, Facebook is now saying, all right, well, maybe the social strategy that we've been focusing on doesn't work because of the tricks that we pulled along the way. And clearly we didn't ask for permission. We just went with it. And maybe that was the wrong way to do it. Another example is Libra project. If you remember, Libra was a huge kind of headline piece 2-3 years ago. And then they got crushed in front of the US government, and then they rebranded. So they rebranded to DM. Same idea. I know they're actually pushing along, so really no nod to that project actually, but just kind of an interesting thing where now Facebook's saying, all right, well, Oculus might be one thing that we're trying to champion now. Maybe the social media era that Facebook had is not dead. I think it'll always be there, maybe, or I don't know, maybe it's just a utility. It's just like, when you want to connect with someone, and you just want that kind of sense of legitimacy. Maybe there's another solution in the woodworks that's better. But I think the future for Meta is going to be really interesting in that it's going to bring a lot more people into the space, first and foremost. That's why I'm actually excited about it. The things that I'm concerned about it, or I think what everyone in crypto is concerned about, which is, hey, like, maybe they're going to take this in the wrong direction. I actually have maybe too much of maybe it could be a little bit of an inflated sense of security here, but I think the way the community has built beyond Facebook, just like the Web3 community, I think we're stronger than that now. And I think there's a lot more authentic directions there. So I think maybe, I don't know, same with like the Libra situation. I'm kind of trusting the Web3 guys right now.
It's interesting, right? It's not Facebook versus Google anymore. It's Facebook versus Web3, and we'll have to see where it nets out. But what, I guess, on the Metaverse side, aside from Facebook, what projects are exciting you out there right now? Like, what are you interested in?
Yeah, maybe more broadly, I think I kind of bucket that into the gaming aspect, because the Metaverse to me is also a game in a sense, right? So with gaming, I mean, I've been focusing mostly on Avalanche, of course, but I think I've also looked at Ethereum, and when I'm looking at Ethereum, it's like, well, these games require like massive amounts of transactions, right? So just until ETH2 comes out, it just doesn't really make sense to me. Even if you're trying to get creative with batching transactions, trying to do some creative things with minimizing gas fees, it's still kind of like, if you have a Hummer, for example, like no matter how many mods you put on it, it's still a Hummer, right? In terms of eco-friendliness and gas efficiency. So with Avalanche, a lot of these applications are coming out of the woodwork. And actually one project that I was able to connect with at Lisbon, who's they're going to deploy on Avalanche very soon, is Krabata. And Krabata is most of the team, I believe, is based in South Asia. I actually started talking to them. I said, hey, like, I know I've only known about you guys for the last 2 months or so, but it can't possibly be the fact that you've only been building for 2 months. Some projects in crypto definitely do that, for what it's worth. But this just seems so involved. There's the graphics are top notch. The demos look great. What the PvP kind of demos they have, like these crabs fighting each other, it looks like a totally normal Web2 game. And so you're not thinking in the crypto context. And I was like, okay, well, what was the decision? What were the key decisions that were made? What does the roadmap look like? And long story short, what I found out is they've been building for a year and change. And so what I've realized is it's kind of the tip of the iceberg analogy. A lot of these projects, especially the ones that are more involved, have probably been building and building and building way before this mania of metaverses, this mania of Web3 gaming has exploded in the last year or so. What happens likely, and based on this anecdote, is it probably true, is these projects will then choose the chain last. That's when they're about to come out of the woodwork and say, hey, we're here. we're about to deploy on X, Y, or Z, or all. And that's where they were saying they were looking at different layer ones, and they eventually chose Avalanche for one reason or another. And that was when we got in contact. And so that was just really cool to see, because then I realized, all right, well, I know this is obvious when you say it out loud, but a lot of these projects are working tirelessly to create really cool, novel approaches to gaming. And the last piece is exactly where people like myself sit on the Ava Labs team, where we're only going to see kind of the home stretch. And it's a little silly to assume that that's the whole journey, right? And so there's probably more games, is what I'm alluding to, that's probably that I haven't seen. And this is where, like, even on these types of streams, I'm kind of saying, hey, DMs are open. The only way I'm going to find out is if you kind of stand in my face and say, hey, look at me. And I'm totally cool with that. And I think that's a good way to just get that conversation going.
I like that, because it's also, you can tell that means it's getting more competitive and the quality of work is going up, because people need to build this all the way out. And then they're coming to you and saying, hey, look at how cool this is. Like, we want to partner with you, right? Where a couple of years ago, that would have just been like, hey, here's an idea we have. Like, can we partner with you? And now you're on this like year-long journey of, hey, when do we integrate? How do we integrate? Versus people saying, hey, we're going to build this utility out and then we're going to go with you. And you guys are going to throw fuel on that fire.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, I think another thing is, like, for us, it's really important to understand that journey. We need to understand where effectively the customers, or where these users are coming from, or the projects are coming from, because otherwise we are working a little bit blind because of the nature of open permissionless systems. People can just deploy and you're like, all right, well, what was happening before that contract was deployed? It's not really clear.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And it's like gaming. It's like, it just keeps coming back around. It keeps coming back around. And it's like the innovation keeps getting pushed in that space. And it just always makes perfect sense for me. And it's like Metaverse feels like gaming in a sense, where it's like, you know, are you going to hop into a Metaverse to like just do work at first? Like, is that what it's going to be like? You're just sitting at a computer together and you're like at home. I don't feel like that's the way it's going to be. It has to be fun. Yeah. And it's like, we're finally at a critical mass in this industry where it can integrate and it can feel like the right thing, but you're picking up that value that you earned and you can take it anywhere, versus like, hey, $99 a month to play EverQuest every month. And you're just like getting crushed when you're 16 or whatever. And now it's like, hey, I can take that up and I can take that work somewhere else, or I can come back later. And it's just, man, I would love to be like 15 years old right now.
Right. And I think that comment of fun also persists across a lot of what Web3 is about, it seems. And I've thought about that most recently with a lot of these new DeFi protocols that are coming up, that are innovating on the UI level, the storytelling level, the narrative level. What I mean by that is, like, one example that I talk about often, they're also an Avalanche project, but Trader Joe. Trader Joe, for American listeners, hilarious name, first and foremost. Hilarious name. So you have that fun factor off the bat. And you go, all right, well, some people are like, well, isn't that like undermining its own legitimacy because it's kind of treating it as a joke? And I'm like, yeah, maybe. But if you kind of dig a little deeper and you realize that it is legitimate, then who cares, right? So then you go a little bit deeper and you look at the UI, and the UI is designed into the Trader Joe story. Trader Joe is this friendly lumberjack who comes around and attends to the yield farms and the pools and basically makes sure that you're comfortable and making sure that you're okay. Other projects that are doing similar things are like Teddy Catch is another one. They have this meme where they're saying like Teddy keeps you cozy because it keeps you safe from liquidation risk and low interest loans and things like that. And so what I realize is I'm like, all right, well, the protocol is of course a huge portion of the innovation, but now you can actually, it's been proven by basically Sushi, I think, leading the charge, but you can now fork all these different protocols and then still be different in a novel way by differentiating yourself from that narrative perspective or that storytelling perspective. So now what I've realized is this community of Web3 people, we're obviously serious people. We care about the longevity of this industry. We also care about solutions that work for everybody. But who says you can't have fun along the way? And I think that's some of like the early internet culture that's now coming back out. It seems like kind of everyone who was on their laptops or even like their boxes that we used to own that you stick a floppy in. And when you were connected, it was really fun to start seeing that community. So now you have community programmable on chain. You have connectivity that's super, super fast. And then you have these really cool ideas that are trying to disrupt more legacy, perhaps quote unquote boring industries like finance and enterprises.
Yeah, I would say tell the Trader Joe people that are saying that the name is not cool. Tell that to the Doge and Sheeb and Floki owners, and hold little early on. Like, if someone says that, you're kind of missing it a little bit.
Totally.
Some current events. I read Aave launched on Avalanche, and there was like $1 billion in liquidity in like hours.
Yeah.
Like, what's the story there?
Yeah. So taking a step back, one of the biggest pieces of probably the last 9 months since we last spoke was Avalanche Rush. It was this incentive program initially thought up actually shortly after we spoke, probably, where we were saying, all right, well, we have all the primitives, we have native primitives, we have a bridge coming along the way to help with interoperability between ETH first and foremost and other chains coming soon. So what's this issue with what's the tension with trying to change user behavior? In crypto, we all know this. It's very tribal. It's also a religion in a sense, where people are tied to their tokens or their projects for obvious reasons, but also because of the storytelling and the brands that we're also familiar with as well. And so what we realized is, especially as I think Polygon was doing it, and there's other projects that were doing it as well, saying, all right, well, incentives are the key, and that's how you bootstrap it. No way to kind of resize that narrative. It's just the way the game is at this point. And so we said, okay, let's launch an incentive program. Let's incentivize native projects, but let's also incentivize the blue chips across other leading smart contracts protocols. And so that's where like Aave, Curve, SushiSwap, those guys were kind of from the ETH camps. I know some of them are multi-chain, but started on ETH. And then there's also like the Trader Joe's, Pangolin, and the Avalanche native dApps that we incentivize as well. So when we announced it, it was roughly around 200 million in incentives. Because the token has appreciated since then, it floats around 600, 700 million in incentives.
Wow.
And what the key here is it's not so much the money, because you can kind of keep throwing money at the problem that just kind of prolongs, I guess, the growth perhaps, but it might be a short-term solution. That's what a lot of people are asking. What I say is I compare that to the ride-sharing narrative. Ride-sharing companies early on, Uber, Lyft, if you recall, they were giving $30, $40 per referral for rides. It was just money raining everywhere. It was VC money raining everywhere.
Right.
The thing that is evident now is, of course, the incentives have dried up a little bit. It's not as fruitful. It's probably like $5 a referral, and it's only for new users, things like that. But the app still exists, and there's actually a shortage now. So, and for other reasons, but there's a shortage now. The thing that I'm trying to get at is the incentives are one way to get to the end goal of proving your protocol's worth or its utility. Because our thesis, one of a few, I would say, but one of the main ones is when people use Avalanche, they will feel why it's better than other smart contracts protocols. It doesn't make sense for us to scream from the mountaintop saying we're better with stats. No one cares about stats because there's so many numbers being thrown at you in crypto. And how do you digest all of that? And what does it mean, especially from a sourcing issue too? But what is indisputable is once you come onto the Avalanche ecosystem or on other ecosystems for what it's worth, but you come into an ecosystem, you use the applications, and then you walk away saying, okay, that makes sense to me. I get why X is better than Y or Y is better than Z. And that was the initiative. We're going to extend that beyond this Rush program, TBD on what other initiatives are happening, but it's definitely a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, and you mentioned VC a little bit, and when you talk about that fund, $600 million, and there are other layer ones, and there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of money flowing around to kind of push innovation. But some of these VC funds in the early days and how much that they're raising is very indicative of how healthy that startup ecosystem is going to be over those next 5 to 10 years. When you're looking even at just what you guys are doing, you technically would be one of the largest VC funds in America. Right. And it's like, you're just one kind of piece of that puzzle, and you're going to drive tons of innovation through that for 5 to 10 years, and then when you look at all of this kind of combined together and you realize the amount of capital that's going to be just driven straight into Web3, I feel like not a lot of people understand how impactful and how important that is. It's like, you just see like a headline, like, so-and-so, raised $200 million fund to work on like, Shopify ecosystem or what, e-commerce, but this is like 100 times that.
Yeah. And I think that's a signal that not many people realize is a strong signal. I mean, it could also mean, certain things with like oversubscription of a certain sector, of course.
Sure.
But I think one thing that's different is if you compare like 2017's era, you had a lot of retail money. And I think people kept saying the institutional money was here, but it wasn't really here. I feel like that was the hindsight analysis, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right now, I still don't think institutional money is truly here, but it's definitely coming. And that's the difference to me, at least. And that's what's been really fascinating. And also, it's not just the crypto funds, because of course, crypto funds, you have crypto funds that, made a lot of money on Bitcoin and then hop to the next coin, and then they've made more and more and more, and it just keeps going. And so that's one angle. But you're now seeing legacy hedge funds, VCs, now saying, all right, well, we're going to have pretty large allocations only for gaming in Web3, or only for DeFi and Web3, or only for Web3 things. And that's, I think, the unique stance that people are having now that's different.
I agree. We talked about ETH fees, right? Like gas fees. We've talked about this. This is kind of the proliferation of the layer ones that's happened. And like you guys are kind of part of that, like specifically like EVM compatible layer ones. And now that like, and it's like, we don't even have to talk about Ethereum. It's just like, I don't know how they're going to figure some of this stuff out. What happens to the people that are mining once this ends, when it's like you kind of rug pull them. But like, how are you thinking about like differentiation, from a branding perspective? Because it seems like as we get further along, and as kind of like you're saying, like some of the technology is not really, it's not a piece of it anymore. It's like, hey, it's like it's just easy to do this across these chains. Like, how are you thinking about that differentiation? Is it brand that you guys are trying to work with? Is it ease of use? Is it developer ecosystem? Like, how are you trying to adjust there?
Yeah, what's funny is I think you hit every single one, but in that order, perhaps. I think brand is really important now, especially as it's not just this game with the mid to lower funnel, very close to home crypto enthusiasts. Now you're seeing, like a lot of different crypto brands all across the world. The fact that FTX is pretty much in every single sports stadium is one signal. Another signal is you have prominent people who aren't even close to fintech. Mostly, maybe, I know, top of mind would be like Hollywood, the Hollywood stars, perhaps. And I don't necessarily know if that's a good or bad signal, just definitely one signal. There's also musicians. Yeah. I know they're a little bit closer to the creator economy, so that's not as much of a stretch. But you have every single person involved now, or type of person. So that's where I think brand is important, because when you go to someone who's top funnel, far away from crypto, and say they don't really know the ins and outs. Like if I tell them, hey, by the way, we have the fastest transaction finality and we're the most decentralized because we have 1,000 validator nodes.
I'm already on TikTok, Jay.
Lost the sell, bad sales pitch on my part. So that's where I think it's really about focusing on what makes them really, really passionate about this stuff. And we're still trying to figure out what that really is. But I think a lot of the new brand-led initiatives, like one example being the Andretti partnership, and being solidified last week, that's one of the lines effectively that we're throwing, and we're saying, hey, like let's start engaging with the motorsports fan base. The motorsports fan base indexes pretty highly with niche technologies like cryptos. Same thing with like sports like tennis, and also snow sports as well. So you're going to see a lot more of Avalanche playing in that and trying to see what message sticks within those niche audiences. And if we're able to then find successes there, you're going to see that widely spread across the board.
Yeah, no, I love that.
I'd be curious on like just your strategy in general. I mean, noticed you have 362,000 Twitter followers now. You're talking about Andretti Motorsports. I mean, what exactly is the strategy for Avalanche? Whatever you can reveal publicly, and what's working and where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, so there's so much going on, but maybe with social, let's just pick social just for the conversation topic. Social strategy has really been something that's evolved over time, and it starts with a basic framework and understanding of your audience. Twitter has a content lifecycle or kind of attention span of like a second. It's really more like a few hours, but you guys know it. It's like if you tweet something, it's dead after 5 minutes. So understand that world truth, and also understand that there's a lot of noise. So how do you navigate through that? Well, tie it to one core message. We realize that our strongest value proposition as Avalanche relative to other layer ones is transaction finality. The other ones, you know, Avalanche might be stronger at, but it's splitting hairs and it's not worth fighting that battle. So transaction finality was where we wanted to stake our confidence. And then you'll notice every single line item on socials, we post every 2 hours usually, and it's automated. So it's actually just a team of 2. And it's very lean still, and we definitely want to scale that higher. But it's a matter of, okay, how can we basically tell the story without always saying that Avalanche is the best? No one wants to come to something where the only person that says they're the best is the person that is talking about themselves, right? So you want to include your partners, lift the ecosystems up. If someone in tangentially is doing something amazing in the ecosystem, then pull them onto the feed and make sure that that story matches that main narrative that we talked about with transaction finality being kind of the focus that we're pushing towards. And after that, then you'll soon notice like, all right, well, some things people don't engage with and some people engage pretty highly with. And so what's crazy is now we have a 24/7 social circuit. And we also then drive a lot of our effort towards Twitter when we say, hey, like if we have a webinar, come to our Twitter. If we didn't, I don't know if you guys saw, but we drove an ice cream truck to Masari mainnet, gave out free ice cream.
I saw that. That. It was in New York. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. We gave free ice cream, and any person that wanted the free ice cream, they just had to follow Twitter. Like little things like that. Obviously, that's not going to move it tens of thousands of followers, but you see how little activations that kind of make Twitter really strong, and that's what bolsters it to the level that we have it now. And we're probably hitting about 10K in growth like every week, honestly. So I'm hoping that maybe end of November, early December is when we hit that 400K mark.
Congratulations. Yeah, and you said something that resonated with me. You were saying, you talked about frequency. You're posting every few hours, and you got a team of 2. And
yeah,
that's really, really hard to do. And I mean, from our standpoint, we built tools to automate that and share very easily, so we can constantly keep it going. But I'm curious, how do you operationalize that much content to create all of that with a small team?
Yeah, I mean, we try and focus on the easy wins first and foremost. So don't necessarily reinvent the wheel. If there's a post that says everything you needed to have it, just simply pass that through as a retweet. Not a huge deal. If you have more time to make efforts on it, templatize a lot of those milestones. So we have off-the-shelf templates for every single milestone you could possibly think of that's related to Avalanche. Or if it's not made, it's being made right now. And so we're still trying to chisel away at that. And that's where we're realizing we're at our capacity to really punch beyond the level that we've been punching. I think the next phase is really engagement with the followers. I think that's probably our weakest point right now. We don't really have an always on social manager. I think the engagement is really important to set that voice for the brand. The Avalanche voice kind of exists. It's like lighthearted and fun, but it's not really clear where it stands yet. And I think it might lean more towards into the lighthearted and cheekiness, but we have to find that balance, because at the end of the day, again, finance can be fun, but we're also dealing with people's money. So I think there's that balance that we have to strike.
And are you seeing, I guess, what kind of activity do you see? We're in this kind of 24/7, every time zone. People have expectations in literally every time zone for like, they hop onto your Twitter and they expect something to be there. How are you dealing with that globally?
Yeah, I mean, that was what we had to kind of grow into a little bit. I think at first we weren't doing it at the level that we're doing it now. So what ends up happening is you guys got to prioritize and maybe just don't listen to the strong signals or perhaps negative signals likely, but the signals to begin with, just because at the end of the day, it's only, we're only human. And again, we're a lean team to focus on. So what we did was we realized, we have a lot of team members in the US. Let's do the 9 to 5 schedule. All right, we conquer the 9 to 5 schedule. Now let's do that to 9 to midnight. And then once we did 9 to midnight, then we figured out how to allocate the times while we're sleeping. And so we basically do it that way. And if you think about like 1 a.m. Eastern to like 7 a.m., that's all automated. That's no one's actually manually doing that. That's been scheduled ahead of time, way ahead of time, likely. I think another aspect is localization. So that's where we need to direct people to the languages that they're comfortable with, because English, a lot of people speak English, of course, but it's also like, again, you're dealing with people's money. People are going to be much more comfortable with doing things with their money if they're comfortable with how they're receiving that information. So that's where we've scaled our community effort. I think we hit 1 million total owned community members, if you will, like across all channels, including Telegram, Discord, Reddit, all those things, a few days ago or last week. And that makes up, I think, around 15 different regions and languages that we support, with at least 2 community members per language.
Wow, congrats. That's huge. That's huge. And so as you scale this, and we see this too, but like in different regions of the world, different social platforms are just, they're used more. You know, for example, we're seeing like lately more use on Facebook as an example. Which we never did before.
On Meta's Facebook.
On Meta, I'm sorry.
Yeah, whoa.
Still Facebook app though.
So
Facebook app.
You know, and we're seeing also Discord. Discord has kind of very specific uses for things like support and things like that. But what kind of channels are you playing in, and where do you see opportunities?
Yeah, I've said this from day one, even like since like my early days in the space in 2015 and 2016, is have a channel at least set up on any area or channel rather, or any social channel that you think might have a customer. It doesn't mean that you have to have a social strategy running on it. Just have something, because at least, you know, you have the, I'm sure you guys have done this. I've definitely done this. You do your research. Maybe it's crypto related, not crypto related. And you go, oh, well, I'm just going to flag this. So then at least if I check my Facebooks from time to time, I'll hopefully get that content so I can stay up to date on something, even if there aren't any updates, right? And so that's kind of the base level recommendation I've always given to all the projects I advise, and even the marketers I speak in the space, because you just never know where they're hiding in. Like, there's different use cases for everything, and you're just not going to be able to account for everything, or account for everything if you kind of just like pick and choose, right? And then after that, that's not helpful, because you're not necessarily going to have a fully fledged social strategy for every single social media platform that exists. So instead, then when you actually figure out how to execute on the social strategy, use the tools that exist in your advantage. So I recommend social scheduling tools like Buffer. We use Sprout Social that can just do it across multiple channels in one go. So we basically focus on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn in one batch. The content might look separate, but the workflows are in one go. So if either myself or the social lead, we're focusing on content on the social channels, then we're like, all right, well, let's just quickly put it on Facebook, LinkedIn, and call it a day. And again, you just have to know the rules of engagement for each platform. So Facebook and LinkedIn, if you played the same posting cadence of Twitter, you're probably going to get blocked and reported for spam. Right. It's just going to be not a great look. So understand those rules, and eventually you can have the system that scales pretty nicely, again, with just one person. I've done this in previous roles where it was early days, and even at Ava Labs, when I was the only person running our socials, I was running probably 6-7 channels, and it was, you know, pretty strong in terms of content when it comes to flow. We had probably 5 postings on Twitter a day, and like one every other day on the other ones.
I think you got the right idea, because, you know, it's interesting because we track all this influencer activity across every coin, and there's one general trend that we see that's successful across all of them, and that is that they're not posting, you know, earth-shattering content every post. Sometimes it's an emoji, sometimes it's like a bullish, sometimes it's like it's nothing. But the one commonality is that they're posting anywhere between 20 to 40 times a day on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I say that works because when you look at the overall engagement numbers within their posts, incredibly high, and it builds over time, and their following builds over time. And I think where we see some of the projects failing is they wait for that one big giant announcement, and they're posting once every 3 or 4 days. Yeah. And because the feeds move so fast, they lose all frequency, they lose all engagement. It's invisible, and Twitter is going to not show their post very much to anyone. So it's an interesting place to play for sure.
Totally.
Just kind of like teasing out some insights out of what you guys are talking about here. It's funny. It's like, because we're thinking the same thing. It's like, I don't know, we've got like 160,000 followers or whatnot now. And you guys have 362 and we're still figuring engagement out, right? Like you got all the way there and we're still like, well, we're trying to kind of figure engagement out still a little bit. It's like, it's a kind of a lesson, I think, to people that are getting started where it's like, just go out there and do it, right? You don't need to have this exact perfect plan. You just have to go test. And like, I even remember John posting probably like a month or two ago. He's like, I think I just posted like 20 times in an hour and it like didn't matter. Like, I think our followers went up and the engagement went up. And so, no, you guys are two peas in a pod, man. Jay, you were like, John's like you weren't even talking about Metaverse and like he had already written it. He's like, you guys like reading each other's minds over here. It's awesome.
Did you not see Mark Zuckerberg's video yesterday where he announced the logo and then there's this whole video of him in this virtual world making phone calls that I think they were in Brooklyn actually.
He had a Sweet Baby Ray's sauce in the background. There's some like hilarious. There's some genius in that recording. It's obviously a team focused on trying to make this go as far as possible.
That Sweet Baby Ray's video is probably one of my favorite videos I've ever watched, where he repeats it about 5,000 times in his backyard.
So funny. All the memes.
You share it way too much.
But that's like the insider, like that's the fun. Like, you know, there's a genuine laugh from all of us there because it's like, that's fucking hilarious. Like, it's unbelievable that but you gotta lean into it. You know,
totally.
Like you gotta lean into what's happening to you. And it's like, I know sometimes when things are different or new and you don't know what's gonna happen, it's like lean into that and like lean into your community. And it's like you're gonna get rewarded for that.
Yep.
It's interesting. We've had individuals from your community reach out saying they're writing an article about this stream, I believe. And it's like that's what it's about. Like when you start to not be your most influential influencer, you win.
Oh, totally.
It's like, and I think I remember, I feel like I was on a stream with you guys or something a while back with OKCoin or something. On Twitter Space.
Yes.
And I remember looking up that day, I was like, well, how's Avalanche doing? And I remember there being a point, I went, wow, that's crazy. Like your community that's been building on Avalanche has cumulatively more activity than Avalanche does.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly the sign of a healthy community. So much so we want to do even more insights and metrics around that, what I'm saying. Because I think it's like, it's one thing to say, you know, there's 5,000 projects built on our chain. And then like each of them has 5 users. Like there's no transactions, there's nothing going on. Versus you got some very healthy projects that are even outpacing the main chain that they're on. So I think that's really an interesting thing right there for sure.
And that's what you're seeing, I think, with these new brands that are popping up and getting really creative with all of the social strategy that we're talking about. You can have growth where, I don't know, like there's memes that exist on the application layer that push Avalanche farther than it could ever go because the application is useful to that end user. Again, like it's the other analogy I use is when the internet was starting, I mean, I bet the devs were probably saying this, but most people probably weren't saying, hey, guess what, guys, TCP/IP, it's the next best, fastest protocol. It's going to crush everything. It's going to take over the world. That just doesn't make sense to anybody. It really also, like, you don't feel that emotion. The other thing that makes more sense is, hey, I can get books from this warehouse to my door in 2 days shipping. I can get a car and have it deliver me to my destination point, all from my mobile app. Those are the things that I think can stretch it farther. And that's actually what excites me the most. Even a little bit of Lisbon, I think, gave a little bit of a taste of how big this has truly come. Because when you're hiding behind the screen, you sense it. You know, even if you look at LunarCrush, you see the data, but it's not the same thing until you actually speak with 50, 100, 300 people in 1 week, and you're like, well, I actually had no idea that you guys were doing this. Oh, wait, you guys are already deployed? Oh, wait, you already have this much TVL? Crazy. Oh, you're also now doing this, and like you have raised funds? Like, that's incredible to me, and something that makes me really excited about this space as a whole. I think something that you didn't really sense too much in even the last few bull runs and even during the bear markets, of course, just because everyone's so focused on building.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think about, like, a question on top of that would be, when these projects are hiding, and they're doing all this work, they're building, and then they're coming to you and they're saying like, hey, Jay, we're thinking about building on Avalanche for this thing, but we're also talking to XYZ over here. Like, what is your conversation look like at that point with them to say like, here's where you guys need to go and why?
Yeah. The main thing is it actually makes it tricky to scale, in my opinion, but you have to really understand the problems that they're solving. There are certain people that care about the value props that we think matter, right? The transaction finality. But there's some people that actually don't care about that at all. They might care about other problems. Like there was actually one conversation I had at Lisbon too, is someone was talking about EVM chains. And I was just talking about EVMs, and I was like, there's plenty out there, but if you care about security, because it seems like you have a technical background, there's about 1,000 validator nodes. And the reason why that number is probably not really grown tremendously from there is purely because the minimum staking requirement's pretty high. It's because the token is appreciated. And that's something that likely will get worked out once governance is launched. But that's something that I was saying, and it resonates with this person I was speaking with, because this person comes from an ETH background, is a developer, really cares about security as it relates to decentralization. And so that's when I brought that forth. Now, if you have someone from, actually was speaking with a legacy like venture studio, and they're building an NFT marketplace, and I was talking to them, I said, well, let's take a different approach. I don't think you care that much about decentralization. I mean, maybe you do, but that's like the third or fourth line item. Maybe what matters is, all right, well, what we can help with, at least if you partner with Ava Labs, is we can help you with the expertise, because a lot of the people on the team run way deep in this space, at least as deep as you could possibly get, where we've made all the mistakes that you shouldn't be making. We've made the UX and UI decisions that didn't work in 2017 that have started to work in 2020, 2021. And so that's how you really have to understand that conversation, which makes it really tricky. I think that as marketers, I think you might relate to this line, and I've been saying this more often recently, but when people go, what's your job as a marketer? I just say, I'm a storyteller. I just tell stories and hopefully it lands. And it's kind of like you stand on stage every time and you tell a different story. One story might hit with my grandparents in crypto, probably a very simple story, but a story at that, right? Yeah. And then a story with you guys might hit more because you guys are obviously in the space. I can pretty much nerd out all I want and you guys will be like, yes, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And then maybe the newcomers might be a little bit in between. So that's where I think it's been fascinating to really be in the space pretty much from day one, seeing how the story has evolved from my inner workings, where I used to go, well, here's Satoshi Nakamoto. And I'm like, wait, no one cares about that anymore. I mean, people care, but people don't. And so let's figure out how to tell the best story for that end user. And I think if everyone in this world is able to have that model and that framework and just really tell that story and not necessarily get into the nitty gritty and tell it in a few sentences, I think this space really has a lot more room to grow.
Yeah. And I like what you said, about TCP/IP, and I've definitely used that example before, because it's like, and it makes me realize that we are still kind of early, because, you're not explaining like Instagram. You're not like, well, like, when you upload the photo, like it's going to go to the cloud. And then like, it's like, no, like you get to connect with your friends better. Right. Yeah. And I feel like where we are still with Web3 a little bit is still explaining. They're like, well, what, like how, like everyone's like, how does this even work? Like, is it just come from nothing? Like, how is this even possible? And I'm like, well, yeah, but like also look at like everything else. It just came from nothing. It's like, where does stock come from? It's like, well, they just like made it up one day at the beginning. It had no value, but then once enough people thought it was valuable, it was valuable. It's like, well, where does utility come from? It's like, well, we used to have 0 people on LunarCrush. It was just John and I, and now it's like, hey, like all these people are there. Like there's value that's created, but I think people are having a hard time. And John was talking about this before, of like unlearning is much harder than learning. And, to unlearn what like the traditional banks have been doing and what DeFi is, it's like, it shoots to people's core, because someone has to admit that they might've been wrong. Yeah. And people do not want to admit that. They just want to be like, no, and they want to fight. So it's like that narrative. I feel like that's why it's like you said, there's people who are 80 and there's people that are 20. That's the thread that connects those people, is the willingness to say, I was wrong before and I'm going to pivot. Yep. And like, that's like kind of what an entrepreneur does.
Spot on.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more. I know you're in Brooklyn, but I was in Lower Manhattan walking around there a few weeks ago, going, man, these buildings are enormous, and they must be terrified. They must be absolutely terrified. Or are they adapting? Or what, like, where are they? And like, how can crypto support these buildings if all these companies go out of business? Is crypto
Right.
going to take over where Wall Street is? Like, where does this go? And you get this eerie feeling just walking around, and it
Yeah.
feels like you're in like the land of the dinosaurs, but yet it's still in control. And
Yeah.
I'd be curious your thoughts on that. And I know you're in Brooklyn, which is like this just there's like an uprising in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is. It really is so cool. I mean, when people ask from overseas, they go, "Oh, well, do you guys have an office?" And Ava Labs, we do have an office being built out. It's in Williamsburg. And they're like, "Oh, well, did you move for work?" I was like, "Actually, I didn't. I lived here purely for music and social reasons." And it just happened that all of a sudden consensus plopped on the map and basically started it all. It is credit goes where credit's due, I would say. They scaled incredible amounts in 2017 era, and I think what happened is a lot of the folks that spun out became their own companies, started not necessarily going too far out, so they just set up shop really close to home, if you will. And then some of the talent that wasn't able to be retained, or people that just left, they were able to say, all right, well, maybe I can start my own company and start something in Web3, or maybe something not Web3 related, maybe more on fintech side. And I believe Brooklyn also has a fair amount of fintech subsidies, because I think there's a place called Bushwick Generator that I know of that I think got one. And so I think they're also trying to push for infrastructure plays, because I mean, I grew up in New York. So when you would come and take a yellow cab out to Williamsburg, even like 10 years ago, the cab driver would be like, "Hey man, where are we going? Are we sure we're in the safe part of town?" And like, Justin Bieber lives like 2 blocks from me now, so it's definitely safe. Maybe now that's the top signal for Williamsburg real estate. But all jokes aside, I think to your question, John, about the buildings, that's actually something that I haven't really thought of. Like, there's so much office space, and now that work is being distributed across the world, COVID has accelerated remote culture. Crypto was always remote friendly, but now you're seeing that across every single industry.
Yeah.
And that flexibility is kind of what you're seeing with Web3. Like, you're empowering the individual. Work is now no longer about this corporate entity and you basically being attached to it to the hip for the rest of your life until you retire. It might still kind of feel like that a little bit. I'm not trying to really alleviate that whole relationship, but at least there's a little bit of a give and take now, where the corporation is like, well, people have a lot more choice. It's actually about your life. And if you can mold it around work, that's actually a much better and healthy society, because then you'll have better outputs, and hopefully that kind of traction will pick up. And now again, for the office spaces, who knows? Like, maybe in kind of a officeless future, maybe it's just cool paintball arenas or something. I have no idea. And if that's the case, I'm down to play. We'll have a great time.
Yeah, it has to be some sort of live work.
You go to every major downtown in the world, and there's a big bank logo on the biggest building in that downtown.
Yeah.
Go to Toronto. It's all giant bank logos everywhere, and it's just, well, what is that going to be? Is that going to say Avalanche in the future?
I hope so.
Is it,
Yeah.
like,
well,
what goes in its place?
Remember the reason why they used to do that was because banks needed to be, and churches too, I think religious buildings, but banks especially needed to be very large to show off kind of the grandeur of it all, and really being like, all right, your money is safe with us because we have all these ionic columns and Greek carvings and things like that. And that persisted across kind of the early finance days, because it was basically a boys club, just like the Wild West of traditional finance, I would say. And those legacy buildings still persisted. Now, what's interesting is, if you think about the new wealth transfer in crypto, you still might actually have a need for those things. I'm not sure, but I mean, the one use case that comes to mind is, if you have a ton of your I guess your net worth or your life savings on a ledger or a hardware wallet, or a multi-sig is probably the best in this case. But a multi-sig hardware wallet, are you going to keep that in your closet, in your house, where people likely know where you live? Probably not. I mean, the Winklevoss twins, they put their Bitcoin ledger in a safety deposit box at a bank, if I recall correctly. So that's an interesting direction. It's kind of going backwards a little bit. I actually get the idea. Like I actually was thinking about it myself too. I was like, well, all right, that's kind of interesting. Maybe it's just a different custodian. Maybe there's like hardware wallet custodians that kind of basically are new age banks. Who knows?
It's like wine storage for your hard drive.
Yeah, exactly. Cheese storage, wine storage. There's so much for all these, large, high cost goods.
Yeah, that is interesting though, because it's like the quote, the original Bitcoiner quote, like not your keys, not your coins. Like those are their keys, but someone else like has them, right? And if shit does hit the fan and they go over there and they're like, hey, that's my thing. They're like, what are you talking about? What safety deposit box? And it's like, whoa, well, are those really yours? Which is also kind of interesting. But I think that's like, we're not going to go down the Bitcoin or libertarian rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, it's just going back to New York a little bit, it's like New York seems to always just like, it's just like this unstoppable, like cultural beast that just sucks up stuff no matter what. It's like you can't, it's like there's enough people that have been there, that have grown up there, that have been a part of it, that it's like, the culture always gets a piece of everything, where it's like, I feel like San Francisco right now was so tech oriented. And it's like, those are the people that are there that, they were like, hey, we have an office up in San Francisco, so you don't have to drive all the way down to, Silicon Valley and like San Jose area. And now it's like, those people want culture and they want art too.
Yeah.
I don't really think like South San Francisco, like, I don't feel like it's there. And I feel like, I don't know if they're going to recover as much, which I'm sure a lot of the OG locals in San Francisco are like, just get out of here. And it's going to go back to maybe like a really epic OG area to live. But it's like New York, just like, it's just unstoppable. Like it's just going to pull cool people, interesting art. Like you said, music, you can walk anywhere and see whatever you want. It's like, that's like one of the digital nomad stops.
Totally. I think the main thing I say is New York is, and you hear this often with even like pick my friend groups who aren't in crypto at all. And one of the things that is interesting about New York social culture is you don't talk about your profession. You don't lead with that. You might say like, hey, I work here, but you gloss over it. And you talk about other things that interest you culturally, movies that you've seen, anything that is anything but work. Yeah. And when you go to SF, or even like I went to Tahoe right before COVID happened, and it was crazy. Every line that I was in, I felt like I was back in crypto sense, because every single person was talking about their fundraising round in the ski lift line. And I was like, this is like, I'm down to play that game, but it would be exhausting to always have to talk about that. I just can't do that 24/7.
Yeah. No, and it doesn't bring out the culture, like, and that's why I love this, like the NFT kind of art creator side of what's happening. And I love that it's gravitated towards crypto, because those people can now, it's like, imagine if the person that was creating the art for whatever company or whatever illustration is now just running their own thing. Like, what next level innovation in art is going to come out of that when everyone's their own kind of sovereign individual? Like, that's where we're headed. And that's like extremely exciting versus what you're saying, where it's like, oh shit, I got to go raise money for the next like 12 months, then to start to maybe create this thing that might, now I'm losing board seats all over the place. And like, it's not my thing. And then I spin out and like, they do an acqui-hire and everyone gets screwed. Like, how many times has that happened, where now it's just like, if you're 24 and you live in Singapore, the way that you're going to build the thing that you're trying to build is so much different than, someone that's, 35 right now that had, spent the last 10 years in Silicon Valley. And it's like, these VCs, I hope that some of the best, obviously they're pivoting, they're the New York of the VCs, they're pivoting, they're figuring it out. But like that bottom 90% is just screwed.
Yeah, I tend to agree too. And that's all about, I guess, any boom comes with some sort of retracing and consolidation likely. And you're going to see that all across the board. So when people, I think maybe this is kind of like the sentiment I'm trying to get is, it's funny, like in crypto, everyone's like, well, this is a bubble. It's like, well, yeah, of course, like by definition, like most asset classes are bubbles if they get a lot of attention all at once, right? Like marijuana stocks You saw that with meme stocks too. From time to time, they seem to come back for some reason, but they're still coming back. Dog coins as a sector. I love that now it's legitimized as dog coins. That cracks me up sometimes when I say it. And then even just the cryptos that we're involved in as well. And so I think that's it. It's just like it's just kind of like nature taking its toll and things transitioning, and that's what you're seeing right now.
Awesome, man. Well, dude, we hit an hour just right now. I appreciate you coming on here, and it's so much fun to hear all the progress that you guys have made and the way that you're thinking about the world and the way that you're kind of building out the brand there. It's super impressive, and it's been fun for us to watch. So, dude, appreciate you coming back on. This is awesome. Yeah. Tell everyone where do they go find you guys? What do you want them to do?
I think keep it simple. Avalanche AVAX on Twitter. If there are any questions, at least that I could help answer, then DM me JAYKS17 on Twitter as well.
Cool. All right, Jay. Thank you, my man. And John, as always, it's a pleasure.
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah.